Okay, so here we are. They had just been celebrating praise and worship to God for his goodness. We talked about that last week, a song of deliverance. And that's why we praise and worship God and raise our hands and clap and sing. I could tell those of you who weren't here last week, I'm like looking around the room, I'm like, oh, he wasn't here last week. That's why he's just standing there like, I love Jesus in my heart. Okay, you got to catch up. You got to watch last week's sermon. So here they are now, 3 days later, they're in the desert. And they start to get worried because they're running out of water. They probably brought some water with them, water skins, wine skins, jugs. But now it's running out. It's 3 days later. They don't have any water, and they're getting pretty nervous, which you can understand. You would think they would just trust God, who just performed all these mighty miracles. If God could turn the river into blood, then he could turn sand into water if he had to. But instead, they start to grumble and complain against Moses. And it's easy for us to get in a pattern of grumbling and complaining in our lives too, isn't it? We complain about life. Life is just so hard. Life is so hard. We complain about the system. Like the system keeps the little man down. The system keeps the little man from getting ahead, right? We complain about our leaders. Our leaders, they don't know what they're doing. We complain about our church. Not you at this church, but your last church. You complained about that. You complain about your family, you look at your spouse, you're like, man, your family's crazy. And she's like, your family's crazy. And you're like, I know, they are crazy. Like we complain about so many things. It's like the Hunger Games, but the grumble games. Many people come into your life and you will grumble them all to death. Many will enter, no one will leave alive without getting grumbled to death or complained about. It's like, it doesn't matter who you are, I'll find something to complain about. We just have that tendency. Yet the Bible's very clear that Christians have no business talking this way. It says in Philippians 2, do everything without grumbling or arguing so that you may become blameless and pure, children of God without fault in a warped and crooked generation. I think it's interesting there that we see grumbling contrasted with purity. Do everything without grumbling so that you can be pure. Everything without grumbling. That's a tall task, isn't it? That means go to the DMV without grumbling. That means paying your taxes without grumbling. Oh God, thank you for those 80,000 new IRS agents. It's just a real delight paying these taxes. It means, man, you get pulled over for a speeding ticket. Don't grumble or complain about it. Spending time with your family, doing chores, changing diapers. Do everything, it says, without grumbling or arguing. We know grumbling and complaining go hand in hand. God tells us don't do it. Why? Well, here's the first point, because grumbling is corrupting. It's corrupting. You have to be on guard against grumbling and complaining. Complaining is corrosive. You get a little bit of it into your heart, it will start to pollute the waters of your soul, and you'll become slowly like the bitter waters of Mara. It's easy to think, what's the harm in just a little bit of complaining? Everybody does it. Or you might say, I'm not grumbling, I'm venting. You're venting something. I know we think, I'm just venting. That's just normal processing. I got to get some things out of my system. That's what we think. And honestly, I understand why it seems that way, but the truth is you don't get anything out of your system through grumbling and complaining. What you do is you give birth to more grumbling and more complaining in your system. And as you vent out grumbling and complaining, it poisons the hearts of the people around you. Now, it's okay to share frustrations with your spouse or your friends, or sometimes you just have to talk through some of the challenges of life, but there's a difference between sharing frustrations versus just grumbling and complaining about your situation. And I've found that you have to be careful, because if you grumble and complain, it will eventually start to affect the people in your sphere of influence. That's why I've noticed over the years, you will rarely meet a really sweet person who has a grumbler for a spouse, because they affect each other, and husbands and wives, they either pollute each other or they purify each other. Over time, you'll become sweeter together, You'd be like that sweet old couple, it's like gives candy, to kids out of your purse, and you're just really sweet. Or you'll become like that grumpy old crotchety, like, get off my lawn couple. Because you pollute each other. And so grumbling and complaining isn't harmless, it's polluting. It's more like mouth diarrhea. I found this picture where someone painted a Sesame Street character around a sewer vent, which perfectly illustrates mouth diarrhea. And if you don't really get anything else out of this sermon and all the Bible stuff goes over your head, all you got to do is just remember a mental image that when I grumble and complain, it's like mouth diarrhea. Well, just a little bit of grumbling never hurt anybody. Do you really want even a little bit of diarrhea in your mouth? A little bit goes a long ways, doesn't it? And so God says that's not the way you're supposed to talk, because grumbling is the opposite of trusting. Every word of grumbling and complaining is a vote of no confidence in God's sovereign plan. I'll say that again. Every word of grumbling and complaining is a vote of no confidence in God's sovereign plan.